I'm being stalked, and no one took serious note of it. And so then I had to stage my own disappearance in order to prove that I was being stalked, to bring attention to the problem of being stalked. The logic is not waterproof.
He was very close to the grandfather, who also was murdered.
Oh, dear.
And
it's becoming a bit of a theme.
And this young gentleman was the last to see
Grandpa. Oh, my goodness. I'm Andrew Rule. This is Life and Crimes. It's that time of year again where we chat about what books to read over summer and possibly even what films to watch or any other pastimes that crop up. I'm here with the podcast's long-suffering producer, Jonty Burton, whose full name is longer than that. And he is going to take part in this because I think he's a very keen reader, an astute student of the printed word, among others. Welcome, John.
Thank you kindly. Among others, and among others today, I'll be more talking about documentaries.
Documentaries?
I think.
I
Documentaries,
see.
For those of you who are more audio and video-wise.
Oh, excellent. That's good because I'm not terribly wise. And what would you recommend our listeners watch or get hold of?
So there's a few interesting ones that are kicking around that are highly regarded, and I highly regard them as well. One of them, probably one of the most timely, is a documentary on Netflix about Sean Puff Daddy Combs.
Yeah.
Or P. Diddy.
I've heard of P. Diddy.
P. Diddy, and you may have been enthralled or at least seen a passing reference or two to the recent trials. And I think he's just been convicted and sentenced to something like 50 months or something like that, one of the weird ways that Americans, run their prison sentences.
Sometimes 200 years, but yeah.
Very strange. But there is a new documentary on Netflix called Sean Combs, The Reckoning.
Yeah.
And it's basically this sort of multi-part portrait of his rise and fall. And it starts off with footage of him holed up in a New York apartment, frantically calling his attorney and looking over the road to a bunch of law enforcement folk who are looking back at him. And you always know it's going to be a good documentary if they've got that sort of thing. If someone has found a piece of vision of the person in question in the moment of strife that is going to engulf their life, someone's onto something. They've dug somewhere good. Yeah,
it does have that ring about it, this one. It's somewhere a sort of a modern cross between O.J. Simpson and the fall of Prince Andrew.
A little bit. And throughout it, it's a multi-part series, but it goes through his rise. But at every stage there are people, warning, they're
against him, about him. That he might be a smooth dude and good looking and this and that and make money in the music business, etc.
Yes.
But deep down he's a gangster with some bad habits.
Deep down,
not all that deep perhaps.
Perhaps not.
Just under the surface. And what was his real name is Sean Combs?
Real name Sean Combs, sort of seen as a bit of a wonderkind producer, seen as someone in the early 90s that was finger on the pulse, youthful music impresario, knew his way around a recording studio. But interestingly, was very early caught up in some worrying things. His group organised a charity basketball match, which ended up in a crush.
Yeah.
Too many people trying to get in. Everyone wanted to be there. Multiple people died. This was seen by some as the making of him because it got his name out there, even if it was in a bad way.
Yeah. There's no such thing as bad publicity in some respects. Yeah.
Exactly. So,
especially in the rap world.
No, exactly. So charting his rise, but always with that little caveat, and the caveats get bigger, the whispers get bigger.
True. It strikes me, I've been around a while and you can see the way that history sort of changes but doesn't change, that the rise of the rapper group, big money in it, therefore hangers on. You have, rappers with big mobs of people following them around and all, soaking up the money, of course. It's very reminiscent of the old-time boxers. Liston and Ali and all the rest of them, all the way back to Joe Louis. These guys who were black guys making a lot of money in a sort of a new and exciting scene, which, while boxing wasn't new when it became televised and had radio coverage, etc., it became monetised, and that meant that, you know, boxers were fighting for big purses, which gave us those huge heavyweight events, and it meant that these guys became household names and that they made millions of dollars instead of not making millions of dollars. And it seems to me that the rappers are, to some extent, a bit like that. And there's always that suggestion that the boxers are mixed up with the mob and with gangsters and with big bookmakers and with dishonest stuff. Always that suggestion that goes all the way back to, you know, the bare knuckle days, really. And the rappers, same thing. Where there's easy money, there's crooks.
Well, everyone loves to hang around someone who's rich and famous if they can as well. So
yeah, it's that deadly mixture, isn't it?
Yeah.
Of money, notoriety. You know, the girls all follow the guys, all that stuff. It all goes together. Yeah, so that's a very fertile field to make a documentary about. What other ones are we looking at?
So another Netflix one, and it's called Fred and Rose West, a British horror story.
Oh, yes, Fred West. I'd forgotten about Fred West. It is a horror story.
It is a horror story. And, you know, one of these ones that may have been on the periphery of your knowledge because it was, you know, mid-90s. It would have troubled the world pages probably back then, but I don't think it was front page material in Australia.
No, I can recall it clearly, but then again, you know, I'm in the business and probably took more of an interest, but very strange setup. They almost looked like each other, Fred and Rosemary West. There was something very deeply creepy about them.
Absolutely. It should explain the plot. I think Fred West, one of his and Rose's children went missing or didn't turn up to school.
Yep.
And they found her body under some paving stones in the backyard. And Fred was immediately brought in for questioning. And it unravelled. He thought he was smarter than the cops. He had that sort of swagger about him. And bit by bit, they broke him down and found out the true horror of what he was up to. I think it was 9 or more young women who he had murdered. And they were all sort of had very much a type, young women runaways or sort of girls who were floating through life.
Hard to trace.
Yeah. And this was at a time the actual murders happened in the 70s, but the police investigation only caught up with them in the mid-90s.
Right.
So they got away with it for a long time. The first episode is titled Fred, and again, like the Sean Coombs documentary, they've got themselves, I think they must have got either a police brief of evidence or the record of interview. They certainly have a record of interview of him. And it seems like it was the first time it's come to light. So they've managed to get that. They've also got footage of Fred going through his backyard with police and going through the paving stones and saying, well, yes, she's buried here and this one's buried here, which is quite confronting to look at. It's like sort of old analog grainy footage, but it's very compelling.
Yeah.
And so the first episode is called Fred. And so Fred obviously was brought in and he was in it from the beginning.
Yeah.
You know, he was not getting free. But the second episode is called Rose.
Rose, as in Rosemary. Yeah.
As in the wife. And it's all about, well, hang on, maybe Fred isn't the sole butcher here. Mm-hmm. Maybe his accomplice. And so it goes through Rose's story, which in itself is upbringing bad. Married Fred when she was, 15 or something
all
like that.
Yeah.
And goes through and
will have been abused as a child. It's inevitable.
And goes through and it paints a picture of Fred was not the only monster in this family.
Yeah, it's a terrible thing. It's probably second only. I don't know if you have a hierarchy in these things really, but it's up there with that terrible story which became a very brilliant book really called about the Moors murderers. The book was called Beyond Belief, and the Moors murderers were Ian Brady and Myra Hindley, and they have also gone into infamy back in the 60s. And their crimes, they killed a series of children up in Yorkshire and buried them out on the moors. But that same aspect of folie à deux, as the French call it, where you've got a couple, and a man and a woman, which is particularly sinister and creepy and awful because most of us tend to trust a couple. We tend to trust the fact that a woman is present, that a couple won't be abductors or killers, but when they are, how sinister is it? Because they can persuade children that they're okay. And children who would not get into a car or accept a lift from or whatever from a man alone will happily go when it's a couple.
And they are the subjects of that really quite chilling photo or sets of photos, aren't they, where black and white, they're both sort of staring into camera wide-eyed and, very, very creepy. Very creepy.
She had the bleached blonde hair, Myra Hindley, and Ian Brady, I think his name was. He had the quiff, the sort of rock and roll quiff, a lean face like a sort of a ferrety face, hard looking, Scottish in origin, I think. And he'd come out of pretty ordinary circumstances in Scotland or somewhere, and he'd been adopted out as a child, which I have to say is a very common shared attribute of a lot of people who've done a lot of bad things. Adopted boys haven't got a great record. Mr. Stinky was an adopted boy. Paul Stephen Haig, who's still in jail in Victoria for killing 7 people, is an adopted boy, and on it goes. It's quite a long list of monsters, and Ian Brady was right at the top of it. Don't know about Fred West. It'd be interesting to know his background because it will be very patchy.
Well, Rose was not his first wife.
No. What happened to the first one? Dare I ask?
Well, certainly and this is where it gets particularly horrifying, but he and his first wife had a child, and that's one of the more horrific parts of the documentary, talking about that and how that ended up. But to be on a slightly more flippant note, Fred did have a very profound quiff. He had the sort of brushback, and then that sort of morphed into a kind of a 1990s kind of lad look, even though he was about mid-50s at the time. With the
lad look,
the lad look. So,
oh dear, Fred. And this is up in the Midlands or something.
It's
Where was it?
I want to say it's Canterbury or somewhere like that. Yeah, and it was one of these ones where, interestingly, the documentary starts with a journo, and this is always good. It's a small town journo who was her first job was to cover this thing, and she did all the right things. She asked the right questions. She did the right searches, really good on-the-ground journalism. And then it ends up with a gentleman from the tabloids in Fleet Street, I think from the Mirror, talking about paying jurors for their stories.
Oh, right.
And how that had the potential to disrail the eventual conviction of Rose. So.
Oh, God, yeah, and that's on Netflix?
That's on Netflix.
Any other really creepy things you're going to watch, or is anything just slightly lighter?
I'll give you one more creepy and one light. Right. How's that? Yeah. For creepy Carman family murders, the Carman family murders. This is a case I'd never heard of before. But
no, me neither.
So it starts off with a distress at sea. Yeah. And the Coast Guard or, someone goes out and they rescue this guy who had spent 7 days odd on the sort of inflatable life raft. His boat had capsized. Yep. Sadly, on that boat also was his mother, lost at sea. Oh. He came from a very wealthy, I think, Rhode Island family. Mm. His maternal grandfather was a sort of bastion of the Greek American community, had pulled himself up by his bootstraps, started a business, multi-millionaire, the large house, the indoor pool, horses, the whole shebang. And his mother, this guy who's rescued his mother, is lost at sea. The son, the guy who's rescued, is on the spectrum or on the neurodiverse spectrum.
Neurodiverse, yeah.
So he's quite matter-of-fact in a lot of his ways. Yep. Interviewed by police and is matter-of-fact. Mm. And either the police didn't know or didn't factor in, or maybe they did factor in his
condition.
His condition.
Yeah, and that alters the way he doesn't act out the the emotions the way that most of us would.
Exactly, exactly. Around the funeral, he's talking to reporters and he's being very matter-of-fact and all that sort of stuff. Anyway, so he's interviewed by police. Now, we subsequently learned that previous to this particular tragedy, he was very close to the Greek-American grandfather that I mentioned before, the one who set up the house and the horses and all that sort of stuff, who also was murdered.
Oh, dear.
And
it's becoming a bit of a theme.
And this young gentleman was the last to see
Grandpa.
Grandpa.
Oh, my goodness.
So it sets up, and I won't sort of go towards the...
Don't spoil it. Spoiler alert.
No. But it goes through the various investigations. And it's one of those ones where they do a very good job of saying there is very credible evidence on this side, but there's also credible evidence on this side.
Right.
And perhaps some of this evidence can be explained by his condition.
Yes.
But maybe it's not.
This is very interesting, isn't it? It's interesting how we judge people by their demeanour, and we do it unconsciously and consciously. But I would call what you're describing a stronger version of the Lindy Chamberlain effect. Lindy Chamberlain and her husband Michael were slightly unusual people. They were religious for a start, which meant deeply religious, which meant they had a certain sort of calmness about bad things happening because they believed there was a higher purpose or whatever. And they had a calm demeanour when many of us would not. So they didn't carry on, they didn't wail, they didn't cry, they didn't sob. They were very self-contained. And that played against them both because people looked at them and said, oh, you're not upset enough. We don't trust you. We think you did it. And then they set out to prove they did it. Yes. And then they ignored anything that was going to exonerate them and searched for any evidence or any witness that they could use to make a case against them. It became a very one-sided investigation. Largely I think, because people took a set against them early, or maybe only one or two investigators took a set against them early in the piece. And I think that their demeanour had a lot to do with it.
Well, it's interesting in this documentary because the young gentleman at the centre of it all will be in a police interview room. Yeah. And the police will ask him a question, what did you think of your mother? And he will say, I love my mother very dearly, and I probably shouldn't say this, but she's got a lot of flaws. Yeah, she's got a lot of flaws, and list off a couple of flaws, and then he'd stop himself and say, maybe I shouldn't have said that. Should I have said that?
Yeah, exactly.
And so, it builds up a very interesting little
It does. Yeah, it is fascinating that, because you can see how somebody could just, with lazy investigators or investigators who jump to conclusions, that someone like that could just dig a hole for themselves and be manipulated into doing so.
Absolutely.
Because where investigators just want to tick the box and say we've got a result and we've got a conviction, we've got an arrest and then a conviction, they're tempted to go with the one they've got in the hand rather than one that's out there in the wind that they can't find.
And we've seen this a lot of times.
We do see this, don't we? We have.
If I can go from the tragic to the comic, I'll give you one last recommendation, Andrew and listeners. And this is one on ABC iView, so we'll move away from Netflix. Yep. And this is a series. It's actually a series that goes across a wide swath of human experience, and it's called I Was Actually There.
Oh, yes.
And it's events like the 2004 tsunami,
the
9/11. They've got an episode about that, someone who was at 9/11, all of these sort of ones. But the one that I would like to bring to your attention, Andrew, is one starring one Fairlie Arrow.
I saw this. Oh, it is wonderful. Fairlie Arrow, the sort of nightclub singer in the Gold Coast.
The Gold Coast.
A very Gold Coast story, isn't it?
It is.
And Fairlie was the big blonde girl who could sing a bit and took, a pretty normal Gold Coast voice from the, 80s?
Yeah, late 80s.
Late 80s, early 90s. And then we see Fairlie Arrow the way she is today after 30 years in America. And many, many, many years of plastic surgery and a different accent. It's sort of shocking. in a slightly comical way.
Well,
but Fairlie, what did Fairlie do, John?
Well, slightly comic in an engaging way is pretty much the way of this documentary. I was not in a newsroom at this point. I don't know if you were sent up at any stage to cover this.
No, never, no.
at the time, but Fairlie came to police or came to the world's attention, Australia's attention, when she went missing, presumed kidnapped.
Presumed kidnapped.
This was a very, very grave thing. The Gold Coast police pulled out all stops. One of them says in the documentary, we had more of these computer terminals put into our building in order to try to find Fairlie. Fairlie appears 2 or 3 days or weeks or something.
Found on the trussed up beside a road somewhere?
Yeah,
but not very well trussed up. Not overly well trussed up.
Overly well trussed up.
And not knocked about much.
No.
Looked well fed.
Looked well fed.
And not that distressed.
Not that distressed by a couple of young lads who were in this documentary. They do a very good job in this documentary of finding the appropriate people. And Fairlie goes to the police and they interview and all that sort of stuff. She then fronts the media almost immediately to tell her story of horror,
which is not all that horrible.
Not all that horrible, because
and she's sort of half smiling
because it turns out, gentle listener, and I don't think this is a spoiler, but it turns out, gentle listener, that Fairlie and an acquaintance of hers had hatched a plot to hide her away in a motel where she had, over the course of the time when she was disappeared,
she had pizza.
She'd get room service. She'd gone out to take the bins out. She'd accepted new towels from the...
New towels. I asked for some more towels. I think she was having showers.
All of that sort of thing.
And she was staying there with a partner in crime, if such as we could say, was a friendly fellow. We'll call him Cowboy or something.
Yeah.
He did have a nickname like that.
He did have a nickname.
And he looked to me like a guy that had once been a rodeo rider or something. He was sort of a slightly... We saw the old version of him, but you can tell he was a swaggering sort of dude back in the day.
That's it.
And you'd be tempted to wonder whether Fairlie had done a bolt with him and then said, oh, hang on, I'm in a bit of trouble here because my husband's at home and he's not going to be happy. Perhaps I've been abducted. Perhaps that's how it got rolling. But she sold it to the police and to the public, or tried to, as they didn't take notice of my claims that I was being stalked.
Yes.
I'm being stalked. And no one took serious note of it, which might be true. And so then I had to stage my own disappearance in order to prove that I was being stalked and to get attention, to bring attention to the problem of being stalked with a false claim. The logic is not waterproof.
No.
You'll note. It's fairly, some people in the wicked unwoke past would call it sort of blonde logic, but it was very silly stuff. And you do wonder whether she was covering up a temporary liaison with the cowboy. I don't know.
We should say that Fairlie ended up being fined. Magistrate did not see fit to impose any further sanction on her, but she was fined something like $20,000 back in 1992
a lot of
money. Whereas I think we say partner in crimes with air quotes on this one, because I believe her friend was in no way pulled up by the police or anything like that.
He seemed to be a fairly harmless fellow.
Yeah.
And thought he was doing her a favour or something. The husband wasn't amused.
Her husband, who was a member of the singing group The Kinsmen.
Was he? Yes.
Who, it's funny because obviously, they do what they do when they grab all of the archival TV, and there's him and his singing group on Family Feud or let's say. And there she is singing some pop song with someone else on very, very daytime television.
I see.
Prime time at 11 a.m. or something like that.
It's very much that. It's a very Gold Coasty 1980s-y cheesy story in every way.
It's fabulous.
It is. It could almost the Coen brothers could make it into a very funny film.
There's an element of sort of I, Tonya or something like that about it.
Yes, it is I, Tonya-esque, And she and Fairlie as she was then was sort of funny. She's this naive, bit daffy, bit dumb, and sort of likeable in a way, a bit naughty, all of that.
Bit knockabout.
Anyway, It spelt the end for her. She went around basically being interviewed by everybody then, and they would put her on, pay her some money to come on, which she needed to pay the police or to pay for the cost she'd incurred.
Yep.
And so she'd go on Willisy or something and be absolutely grilled and crucified, which had to happen, naturally. And then she'd get a payment for that, and that'd help pay off the debt. And now, 30 years later, she's a bit unhappy about that, she says. She thought it was a little bit of an overreaction, and she's really only trying to bring attention to being, she says, stalked, which you never know, she might have been.
Never know.
Hi, it's Gary Jubilant here. Do you want a real and raw look inside the world of crime? Well then check out my podcast, I Catch Killers, where I interview people from all sides of the law.
I draw my firearm and I went into fight mode. I wanted to find and confront this gunman.
I'm not getting verbaled, am I?
I shouldn't have trusted you. See, I'm trying to open my mind up to defence powers.
I know, it's just begging to be said.
Yeah, fair call. We have amazing guests every week. Search for I Catch Killers wherever you get your podcasts.
Anyway, Andrew, that is the sum total of my recommendations, and our listeners aren't really here to listen to me. So, what?
Yes, well, they do want to hear about that stuff. Well, books. I'm going to have a little bit of a dip into the self-publishing phenomenon. Crime writing particularly attracts a big range of writers from, wonderful writers, because in the end, a lot of writing is about crimes of some sort. Shakespeare is, a lot of things are. Right through, though, especially in true crime, to the rankest, and I mean rankest of amateurs. And they all think they can do it. And these days, because the technology is simple and easy and everyone's got a laptop, so anybody can publish some sort of true crime thing or do a podcast or whatever it is. And so we have a range of books out on the market, and I see many of them, which are either pretty rough homemade books done by amateurs. Some are a bit better than that. They've gone to a vanity publisher who's helped do a bit better cover and knock it into shape a bit. And some are better again. And I've been sort of intrigued by this phenomenon, and a couple of them are quite worth reading. Now, there's one out called 11 Minutes, which is a very good title. It's pretty sharp, this one. It's quite well conceived, and it's by a guy called Gregory M. Carroll. And Gregory M. Carroll has a surname which is intriguing because it is shared with a long-dead armed robber and probably killer in Melbourne called Ian Revell Carroll. And Ian Revell Carroll was a boxer and a gunman who was without doubt one of the half a dozen people who did the great bookie robbery in 1976, as I think it was. And that was the Victorian Club in the city in Melbourne, a great bookie robbery, very well known. We've talked about it many times in the podcast. A big amount of cash, officially $1.3 million, unofficially maybe $5 or $6 million in cash, untraceable. It has attracted a lot of time and attention and stuff over the years. And what we didn't know was that Ian Carroll, who ended up dead within 2 or 3 years because he had an argument with Mad Dog Cox, the guy that we call Mad Dog Cox, whose real name was not Mad Dog nor Cox. And Cox shot him dead down at Mount Eliza, I think it was, and legged it. And Carroll was one of these very heavy hitters and a good crook, as they call them, mixed up with the painters and dockers and the whole thing and the boxing gyms, and classic Melbourne crook. But his brother Gregory, his little brother Gregory, has written this book. And Gregory was a straight guy who, wasn't a crook. He went into the legit world and did whatever he did, and quite a smart guy. And he's ended up, I think, in retirement writing this book, which is basically about the great bookie robbery, which is why he's called it 11 Minutes, because that's how long it took. And he's amalgamated, quite clever, he's called it a novel, and he's twisted the facts around. The facts are a bit rubbery anyway about the bookie robbery. There's facts and there's assumptions and there's claims and counterclaims. But he has the advantage of having known his brother. So he perhaps had some sort of insight into his character and the character of the people he ran with. And he's been able to apply that to the whole bookie robbery story, but he's also closely studied all the stuff that's been written and said about it in the past and amalgamated it into one pretty good readable book. Now, it would be improved if it were edited a bit better, but it's pacey and easy to read and tough and laconic. The dialogue is sparse but pretty good. It's sort of believable. It's not lots and lots of it. It's pretty sharp, and I mean, you could sit here and pick holes in it, but I don't see any point in doing that. It's quite a good read for what is essentially a vanity publishing, self-published thing. It's at the top end of it. And I'd suggest that it's probably very close to being as readable as Brian Brown, the actor's books, which are in his dotage. Brian Brown, who's now in his 70s, is knocking out these bestsellers that are rough, tough crime books. And I think the first one was called Sweet Jimmy a couple of years ago. And he's done some more because he's been quite successful. And, of course, the fact that he is Brian Brown and has a profile and, you know, he is who he is means he can sell books. And they're quite readable and they're quite good. But Brian Brown has written them using the knowledge he has of the film industry. So he sketches stuff in pretty fast and his dialogue is there and it's pretty sparse and tough. And they're pretty good. They're not literature. None of this stuff is, you know, Elmore Leonard, let alone anything better. But it's pretty readable and pretty good, and you can see that it would easily translate into film or a streamer into some sort of film. And I think that Gregory Carroll's book isn't far behind Brian Brown, but of course Brian Brown will always outsell Gregory Carroll because one's a big-time actor and one's not. There have been some other self-published books. We've done one on the podcast. It is called Bandit or Priest, written by a man who calls himself Fabian Christian. That is about a case we've covered in the podcast, and we talked to Fabian Christian about a robbery, a real-life robbery that happened in the 1980s in the Yarra Valley. Probably Australia's biggest robbery because it was of gems, opals, diamonds, gold stuff, all sorts of stuff, which could have been worth anything up to 30 million then in the 80s, and which now, of course, you'd say with inflation might have been worth, you know, 100 million, whatever. If those valuations are right, it would be by far Australia's biggest ever robbery, and yet it's one that's largely forgotten. No one was killed, although it did attract tragedy, as we heard in the recent podcast. The wife of the robbed man died of fright within months of the robbery, and the husband, the robbed man, the wealthy man that was robbed, he died of a heart condition fairly soon after as well, so it wrecked their family, this robbery. Not a great book, not a great piece of writing, but again, it's a novel based heavily on a true story, and therefore it has some currency and it's a good one to read on the beach.
And listeners will have, I think, just heard that.
They will have.
By the time this comes out.
I hope so. Fabian Christian is the author, and not totally his full name. He has a different surname, but it's worth a look. And I noticed there's another one on my desk. This is Father, Teacher, Child Killer, The Abduction of Louise Bell and Michael Black, and it's by Michael Madigan. And that is another sort of self-published type book, or reasonably amateurish sort of book, that is a real story about a true case that some people might find quite interesting. So we're looking at the sort of knockabout end of the spectrum here. This literature, it ain't. But if it's literature you want, John,
yes,
I suggest having a look at some from overseas. There is an Irish author, a very big deal Irish author, called John Boyne, Boyne. And John Boyne, among many other books, and he's written some big bestsellers, he's a big deal. He's written a series called the Elements series, I think, and it's 4 books, Earth, Wind, Air and Fire, well, in whichever order. I actually think the first one might be Water in the series, but each of these books, they're not terribly long. They're less than 100,000 words. They might be 80,000. And each of them, they all look like each other, these books. They've got a similar design theme and they all link. So the main protagonist in the first book is a woman who leaves her husband, who's a disgraced politician, and she cuts her hair and wears hippie clothes and no makeup, and she goes and lives on a little island off Ireland to get away from publicity. And there she runs into local people and so on, and has an affair with a young guy and all this stuff. Very readable, very good, and got a bit of edge on it. It's quite edgy and there's a bit of blood in it because she's there because her husband has turned out to be a criminal. You know, he's a child molester, in fact. And it's a very believable scenario with a crime subplot. Then the second book, it picks up one of the young guys from the island who leaves that island to go to Dublin and then to London or somewhere. He becomes a professional football player, soccer player, and tells his story, which involves a crime, he's a gay kid who's playing soccer just to make money, but he's trying to impress one of his co-players, and one of the co-players, this co-player, rapes a girl. And it's a moral dilemma crime story. It's quite riveting. And then the third book interlocks with the first two and so on and so on. So each of these books interlocks with the other, and yet each one has a different main protagonist.
Right.
So I think it's a great series to get hold of, that having read one, you will want to read the other three. I thoroughly recommend John Boyne's Elements series, Earth, Wind, Fire and Water, which sounds like an old sort of progressive rock album, does it not?
Well, I was going to ask, is this a new series of books, or has this been around for a little while?
Around a little while. It wasn't published yesterday, but it's not old. But John Boyne has been around a long time and has sold a lot of books and won big awards. He's very big deal in the Northern Hemisphere. Irish writing is really kicking goals at the minute.
Well, we had on the show the author of The Chain.
We did.
A while back.
Adrian McKinty, Irish guy who lived in Melbourne and was a friend of one of our former colleagues, David Power, who worked with us. Great and good friends. And Adrian is I think it was from the north of Ireland perhaps, and he lived in Melbourne because I think his wife was an academic who worked here, and I think he was driving Ubers or taxis or something and writing at the same time, now in America, and has had a bit of a hit with a couple of books, I think, and may have kicked on, I hope.
Yes, indeed. The Chain sort of blew up.
The Chain was, it was a very well-constructed thriller. Yeah. Very American, and you could see that it would film very well, very tense and tight.
A couple of different points of view, which is always fun.
Yeah, true. It was as if, it was very well done, as if a computer did it, really. It was very sharp.
Although we should say, just for the benefit of listeners, written before the time of AI, so probably
yes, true. No, not at all. I know it wasn't. But I mean, it's just really well grafted together.
Absolutely. What else is on your reading list?
My reading list. I should plug someone that we might talk to in the new year, the evergreen Australian journalist and author, Gideon Haigh. Now, Gideon Haigh is a man of prodigious writing talents and a brain as big as Tasmania, with whom I worked when he was a slip of a boy many years ago at another place. And he was a pale-faced, thin little guy that used to smoke too much and had a worried look, and always very, very fine writer. He's become a most accomplished writer as a fully fledged adult writer, a great writer about cricket particularly, which is a passion of his, but also about other things. And sometimes he's done some very interesting books about relatively small subjects. I think he did one on the history of The Office in Australia. I think The Office, as in the office, an office building. I mean, and did he do one about the car industry or something? I haven't read them all, of course, but he did one called Certain Admissions about a murder in Melbourne in the 50s. That was a very big deal in the 50s about a young woman who was murdered, body found down at Port Melbourne or somewhere under a boat. And the man charged with it was a very popular, well-spoken, handsome radio announcer. And it was a phenomenon at the time. My mother told me about it. She said, people were queuing up to go to court to see this radio announcer in court. Gideon wrote a very interesting book about that. His latest offering is one called Who is Wallace? And Wallace, Mr. Wallace. I remember this story happening at the time. Mr. Wallace lived and was jailed or locked up, in the Arradale Asylum for the Criminally Insane at Ararat for 60-something years. He went in there in early middle age after shooting a man in King Street, Melbourne in the 1920s. He shot him in the 1920s. Somebody, I think 2 young men tried to bounce him about something. He told them not to smoke in the cafe, and they waited for him outside and were going to give him a hard time, and he pulled a revolver out and shot one of them. Now, he didn't defend himself in court terribly well. He wasn't well defended. He was found not guilty by virtue of insanity. He wasn't overly insane, although he did say things like, I own Brazil and things like that. Right. But he didn't act crazy. And he ended up locked up until he died at 106 or 107. And he became quite famous in the last decade of his life as effectively the oldest prisoner anywhere in the Western world, because he'd been locked up for virtually for life really. And it was more than 60 years. And in the end he was totally institutionalised, but he had a nice suit on and he would eat the same food every day. He would play chess and beat everybody in the place. And sometimes he would smoke a pipe. Oh. And they called him Mr. Wallace to his face and Old Bill behind his back. Some people would call him Menzies because he looked like Sir Robert Menzies. He had the big bushy eyebrows. That is a most unusual book about a most unusual man. And like Gideon's other sort of crime-related books, it's small but sort of perfect in its way. And if you want something unusual, get hold of that and a couple of his others. And that, John, brings us to the end of our holiday guide because we've rabbited on far too long.
Thank you, Andrew.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for listening. Life and Crimes is a Sunday Herald Sun production for True Crime Australia. Our producer is Jonty Burton. For my columns, features and more, go to heraldsun.com.au/Andrew Rule, one word. For advertising inquiries, go to newspodcastssold@news.com.au. That is all one word, newspodcastssold. And if you want further information about this episode, links are in the description.